Welcome to the IVF Journey with Dr. Michael Chapman, the podcast for couples who struggle with infertility and want to fulfill their dreams of becoming parents. In this podcast, you'll learn actionable strategies to deal with infertility from Dr. Michael Chapman, or Prof as he's affectionately known. Prof is the co-founder of IVF Australia and is a leading Australian infertility specialist who has helped over 3,000 couples realise their dreams of becoming parents. To access previous episodes packed with ideas, solutions and tips that actually work, head over to Dr. Chapman's IVF podcast on iTunes. You can also ask questions by contacting Dr. Chapman's rooms on 1800 111 483 or by emailing him michael.chapman@ivf.com.au.
That first cry of a baby born after the long journey of IVF remains one of the most beautiful experiences in the world. As an obstetrician and an IVF specialist, I've had the privilege of experiencing this over many thousands of times in my long career, but I still remain moved by each baby's first cry. It signifies the end of a long journey and the beginning of a new life. This is Professor Michael Chapman, co-founder of IVF Australia and host of the IVF Journey podcast. Thanks for tuning in. To access all the previous episodes, head over to my website, www.theivfjourney.com, and select IVF Journey Podcast from the navigation menu. You'll also be able to find the various services that we provide at IVF Australia. Today we're going to talk about the second half of the IVF journey, at least the journey from beginning stimulation through to a pregnancy test. And that second half of the cycle is called the luteal phase. And the reason it's called the luteal phase is because scientists observed that in the second half of the cycle, the place where the egg has come from, the little cyst or follicle that it arrives from, changes its nature, and it's called the corpus luteum. That comes from the Latin. Corpus equals body, and luteum is yellow. And what scientists noticed hundreds of years ago in post-mortem specimens of women, that there were these yellow structures in the ovary, which we now know are where progesterone comes from. So nature, very cleverly, once an egg has been produced, changes the pathway of making the steroid hormones and switches on the production of progesterone. Progesterone is important in establishing a pregnancy for two or three reasons. The first reason is that it's progesterone that makes the lining of the womb receptive to an embryo when it arrives 5 or 6 days after ovulation. It's progesterone which causes the cells in the lining of the womb to change their function, to produce proteins, growth factors, cytokines, all of which will play a part in that amazing process of an embryo attaching and burying itself in the lining of the womb and establishing the blood connections between the mother and the baby, which are obviously essential to end up with a live birth. So progesterone is key to that activity. In nature, if a pregnancy occurs, that corpus luteum continues to function because it is getting messages from the placenta of the baby saying, yes, we are pregnant. That message is HCG, the pregnancy hormone. It tells the ovary to keep on producing progesterone. If pregnancy doesn't occur, the corpus luteum has a fixed life of around 10 to 14 days. And as it declines, progesterone levels fall and a period happens. The second important role of progesterone is to keep the uterus quiet. You may not know it as a female, but your uterus contracts on a regular basis throughout the menstrual cycle. They're not strong contractions that are felt by most women. They're certainly exaggerated at the time of periods, and that's why particularly teenage girls get painful periods. It's the fall in progesterone, allowing the uterus to gain its contractility again, that makes that happen. In establishing a pregnancy, obviously, it's important that the uterus is as quiet as possible. And in nature, the second half of the cycle is a time when the uterus is least contractile, particularly the case around the time of implantation. So that's nature. How does that affect an IVF cycle? Well, what we do in an IVF cycle is artificially raise all of the hormone levels way above what is normal in nature, because we're producing multiple follicles, hopefully to produce multiple eggs. And what became clear very early on in the history of IVF was that if you put back an embryo after a stimulated cycle resulting in collection of eggs, if you put an embryo back in that cycle, pregnancy rates were not that great, and that periods would tend to come earlier than expected. What we worked out by using hormonal testing in a research capacity was that the progesterone levels fall too rapidly, and the lining of the womb, which is quite thickened in an IVF cycle, will break down early. So that prompted the use of agents to keep progesterone levels high. The options that we have in the 21st century, giving the pregnancy hormone by injections in the second half of the cycle. These, as I described earlier, make the body think, make the ovary believe that the woman is actually pregnant. And those hormones stimulate, that HCG hormone stimulates the corpus luteum to produce more progesterone, therefore supporting the lining of the womb. I use the word support because that's what we call it. It's luteal phase support, LPS, you'll see written on bits of paper. So pregnancy hormone does the job, but it has problems. It has problems in women who've produced multiple eggs. If you've got more than 10 or 12 eggs, giving HCG, or Pregnal is the drug name, can result in stimulating ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, which can lead to hospitalization and even intensive care. So it's gone out of favor except for women with low numbers of eggs. I've certainly found that women prefer to have 3 subcutaneous injections than inserting vaginal pessaries for the same 14 days after the egg collection. But it should only be used in women with low estrogen levels and low numbers of eggs. So let's move on to progesterone itself. We can give progesterone orally, but the results probably aren't as certain as giving it vaginally. By certain, I mean that 95% of women, probably it's no different to vaginal. And obviously it's more convenient taking oral tablets. But there's probably 5% where the oral tablets aren't absorbed properly or their metabolism is different. So it's not quite as certain in terms of providing luteal phase support. So over the last 20 years, vaginal progesterone has become the standard for giving luteal phase support in an IVF cycle. Now, that vaginal application can be in a number of ways. There's a gel, there's a pessary, there's a tablet. In fact, there are 2 or 3 varieties of tablets. They all do exactly the same job. They support the endometrium and support early pregnancy. There is one other form of progesterone which is rarely used in Australia, which is intramuscular progesterone. It has been very popular in the United States. Studies show it is absolutely no better than vaginal pessaries, but I can tell you that patients that have had it hate it. It is painful and it makes no difference whatsoever. Fertility specialists in the US have been reluctant to stop it because of tradition and because patients who haven't got pregnant, when they don't use it, are comparing themselves with patients who have got pregnant who have used it. However, studies show it makes no difference. The next question is, having supported the luteal phase, should we go further? And clinicians will range from stopping it on the day of the positive pregnancy test, which is scientifically the logical thing to do. There is no evidence that continuing luteal phase support into pregnancy makes any difference to the outcomes in terms of miscarriage and live births. But some people don't want to be wrong, and so therefore will want to carry on right through until 10 or 12 weeks. Some only 2 or 3 weeks after the positive test, others going all the way through. But the scientific evidence is quite clear. There makes absolutely no difference to the long-term pregnancy rates. Again, there's a reluctance to do nothing, because if you do nothing and you have a miscarriage, you'll wonder whether you should have used it or not. But I can tell you, the science tells us it would have made no difference whatsoever. So that's the luteal phase. I hope that makes a bit more sense now. And don't forget that you can access all the previous episodes by going to our website, www.theivfjourney.com, and select IVF Journey Podcast from the navigation menu.
Thank you for listening to the IVF Journey with Dr. Michael Chapman, the podcast which helps couples negotiate their way through the IVF journey, all the way to parenthood. You can also ask questions by contacting Dr. Chapman's rooms on 1800 111 483 or by emailing him michael.chapman@ivf.com.au.